So last Saturday at our Saturday meeting, I told a little story about my first teacher and also Katagiri Roshi, my first teacher, Kobun Roshi, and Katagiri Roshi. So I'm going to tell it again because I want to refer to that story, talk about that story. So Kobun Roshi, my first teacher, always told us that practice in everyday life was up close to everything. That we should stick very close to things that disturbed us to find out what was going on in us. And particularly if we were around people we didn't like or that annoyed us, that made us angry, upset us in any way, we should stick close to that person because that person was where our practice was. So, this is not easy practice at all. In any event, Kobun Roshi was away one weekend, and Katagiri Roshi came to be with us, to stay and to give Dharma talks, and so on Thursday morning, when we would gather together around the living room, we sat at the Zendo on Wednesday night, and then on Thursday morning we gathered in a living room in the residence where students lived down the street from the Zendo. And Katagiri gave his talk and so forth and asked if there were any questions. And so the student said to him, Katagiri Roshi, I have a terrible time with this person I work with. Every time I go near him, I get so angry. It's so hard for me to be around him. What should I do? And Katagiri looked sort of perplexed and nonplussed, really, and he looked at the guy and he said, stay away from that guy. Well, most of the people here already heard that, so they're not laughing, but they laughed a lot on Saturday when I told that story. It's still amusing, but I want to talk about Kobun Roshi's up close, and maybe we can get a little closer to what Kobun, the seriousness and the importance of Kobun Roshi's teaching. Of course, in any instance, both of these spiritual directions are correct. That we have a choice. If something bothers us so terribly, we can step away from it. And then on the other hand, we can step close and we can find out a lot. So I want to talk a little bit, and maybe we can have some discussion about this. I think it's a very difficult spiritual practice. And Kobun was not an easy teacher. He was very demanding spiritually. Insofar as forms go or other kinds of things, he didn't worry terribly much about it. But as far as spiritual behavior was concerned, he was incredibly demanding and not an easy teacher at all. So sticking close to something that bothers us or something, So as I go out and about and I am shopping or any place, I either run into people I know or people come up and talk to me for no reason at all. Maybe we both arrive at the coffee center or something else. Who knows? But anyway, for some reason people talk, and almost without a doubt, they will talk about our political situation. And they will complain and they will talk about how hard it is and how terrible things are and so forth and so on. And so this up close is happening to us whether we like it or not. We're very, very up close. And even somebody with whom I spoke to today said, I don't listen to the news at all. I just absolutely tune it out. And then went on to talk about the political situation. So we're all up close, and how do we do it? And what is going on in this up close? What is Kobun Roshi meaning when he's saying stick close by that? Stay close. And he is not meaning to get to know that person or to find out what that person is thinking or to, feel this person out and see whether there's some meeting point. It's not what he's after at all. He's after us to really examine closely what is going on with us in relationship to something that is annoying or disturbing or difficult. What is our practice about within that? Not so much whether we are being patient or whether we are quietly listening to something we don't like or disagree with, but what is happening inside of us? What are we doing? And what are we feeling? What's transpiring in us? Are we able to open our awareness enough in these situations to be able to understand what we are feeling and how it is resonating within us? That is what Koben Roshi is after. He's not so interested in whether we're listening to somebody with whom we disagree. The question is, are we listening to ourselves in that difficult moment? And how are we dealing with it? How are we responding? What are we learning about ourselves? What are we opening to? What are we seeing? What are we admitting? What are we allowing? No, it's no easy thing to do. It's extremely difficult practice. But most often, when we are in this situation, and if we give room to open our awareness, something happens. Something very subtle happens in us that allows an expansion, that allows us to move ever so slightly out of the rigidity of our dislike, out of the rigidity of anger or hatred of something. And it isn't that we are going to embrace this person's view or anything like that. The question is, do we have that same view in that moment of utter resistance to this person? Are we any different? This is a very difficult one, I think, in relationship to the elephant in the room, about whom we are most often talking these days. Are we any different when we are stuck and caught in a sense of controlling, wanting to control, and wanting to really dominate the situation so that it won't hit us this way? Are we any different? At least at that moment. This awful thing for us to admit and to expand into and to allow. But I think that the opportunity is so extraordinary that it is really deeply where Koben Roshi's teaching comes to the fore and is where we are and what we are called to look at. For to some great degree, we are certainly all fostering a deep sense of I don't know what's going on in you. I can certainly point to myself, and there's a myriad of possibilities that go on in this, grave disappointment, grave grief, a tremendous loneliness, an anger. I can't imagine all of the things that we could point to. The array of emotional possibilities are tremendous and all valid. And yet, how are we able to expand beyond those entrapments of the mind? And since we are looking at mindfulness, this is where what mindfulness is calling us to practice. And I say all of this truly for our own health. To dwell in this state of disruption and conflict and anger does us no good. It doesn't do anybody's body any good. And the body, without the body, we're not here. So we cannot hide from this, so it behooves us to head into the storm, to get close up when we feel this arising of difficulty and get up real close to it and not put it away. Now, I will admit that the category side of, well, don't go near this person is also healthy, and probably for most of us doesn't last very long. We can step away from it for a respite, and then we discover ourselves right back in the middle of it within a few days, because it's our country. It belongs to all of us. It's the milieu in which we are dwelling. And we hold these truths to be self-evident. All of this is desperately important. So, but I really feel that Kovan Roshi's teaching is so potent right now for everyone. And it has the real meat of spiritual growth in it, and maturity, and maturing. So, maybe there's some discussion we can raise together with this. It's, if we didn't all run into it so constantly, we might say, oh well, it'll all go away, but not happening. Not happening, folks.
I was listening to a speaker today sort of talking about Jung, and this idea that in Jung's conception of the human condition, to be complete or to be whole is to reconcile oneself with one's dark side, to identify that they are also the monster. And I don't know, I guess I never quite saw it in that way. How that's really sort of what makes dialogue possible. It's that you identify with whatever this other is part of yourself, or something that you are capable of. Yeah. And I don't know, he was just talking about how it's so difficult that hardly anyone's willing to do it, because then you can relate to things that are so dark, and he used examples like the Nazis and sex offenders. Like, this is part of the human condition. This is something that can happen. I don't know, this seems very related to what you're saying with, I don't know, I wonder if that was sort of the underlying aim in this. Like, why you stick so close to someone who bothers you. Yeah. Because, I don't know, it's sort of, it seems...
It's your own dark side.
It's your own dark side.
Yeah. I think this dark side, one of the reasons I think it's so difficult is that I don't think we actually meet it until we are a little bit older. And it's just a view that I have about the passages of life. And I think that that we face into that when we're typically a bit older. Women around their late 40s and 50s face into the dark side of themselves. And with men, I'm not sure what the passage is, but for women, there's this, physical process also for women with menopause and facing into the question of their personal power in life. And that occurs, in the late 40s. It just happens. And yet, I'm not saying that younger people can't do that or ought not do that. I do think so. But I think it's also a natural passage in time that you go around that circle and you finally see that, oh my goodness, that's me. That's my dark side. And the dark side is also our creative side. I think Jung says that also. So we don't want to not know that side. And we don't want to dismiss it or throw it away. It's a potent part of who we are. But we should know it. Not dismiss it. So that was a good program to hear today. A good podcast or something.
Yeah, it was a podcast.
And I think that aside from each of us having our personal dark side, we have the archetype of the entire nation's dark side. We also have the large picture of, let's call it, the self of the nation. And that's a very deep, dark side. I mean, it's incredibly dark. And I think that this is what is coming out now and what we are seeing. And we're all having to cope with it and deal with it one way or another. So it's a very difficult time in that. That we have our great notion of what we are as a nation and how brilliant and wonderful this all is. And we do not acknowledge, we have never confessed our sins. America has never said it is sorry for its sins. So we have big karma to pay for what we have done. And it isn't that each person personally has done it, but we enjoy peripherally the privileges of those whom we have stepped upon. So we're responsible to clean it up, like it or not. So we have this opportunity. I mean, I think we oughtn't look at it as so terrible or awful, because the more we embrace and look closely at it and what it is, how it is working in us, we're relieved from the suffering because we step so close. I mean, that's what the work is. The willingness to actually do the work in ourselves, to admit, to look, and to say, yes, that's something I need to deal with and work on. And so it's tremendous opportunity. So we should embrace it. We ought to embrace it. It behooves us to embrace it and clear our own lungs, as it were. Every group, every family, every circle of the human species has its dark side. The family has its dark side, does it not? Oh yes, everybody in here will say, oh yeah. So we've got that dark piece of the family, we have the dark piece of ourselves, the dark piece of the school we went to, the dark circle of every community we walk through. Has its own piece of dark performance as well as its great performance. And so to open to the awareness, what happens that when we step close to it, our awareness expands so that we discover ourselves having the capacity to see how to turn it in our own selves, or how to heal it, or how to influence it.
I've never heard that sort of notion that it's almost like a natural biological process to meet one's dark side, like women in their late 40s.
Yeah.
But the speaker gave an example of like post-traumatic stress disorder, and he explains this as sort of the fracture in one's mind of their inability to reconcile their dark side with their perception of themselves. Yeah. And just sort of, it seems like that is meeting one's dark side outside of maybe the natural or typical progression. Maybe it happens too soon in some people.
It may, exactly, that may very well be.
But I kind of wonder if there's a collective parallel to this. Like collectively, it seems that the human mind is sort of naturally unwilling to reconcile this.
Yeah.
And so it seems to almost naturally fracture around it.
Yeah. Well, that's a very interesting notion then, that fracturing, the national fracturing. And that may be part of our resistance, to be able to admit to our predatory performance. No? Interesting idea. Yeah.
When you talk about because of our past actions, we have a responsibility to clean it up. I wonder if instead we don't have a responsibility to step aside and get out of the way, because it seems like what we've done for so long is interfere and meddle because we think we know best and that we can make things better. And by everything that we observe, we've done just the opposite.
Well, I guess when I say that, what goes to my mind is Native Americans, African Americans, slavery, so forth and so on. And we stand in a privileged position as white people because of what we took from natives, and because the slaves built, essentially built the country. So I think in that way that we have never acknowledged that, and yet that's our foundation. And so if we suffer some PTSD around that, let's say, it was so horrific. All of it's so horrific. So many wars, so much violence in pursuit of in founding this nation. And so maybe we are suffering the violence, that we can't quite come to terms with as a nation. But we are in our privileged position because of that, because of those people. And it's certainly in those areas around racism, it behooves us as white people to stop it, make changes. It's not that people of color are supposed to rise up and tell us that we shouldn't do that. It's for white people to take the responsible position to stop racism. So I'm thinking in that way, Donna.
Yes.
But I also, we make a judgment and we make a call on what we do and where we step in and where we stand back.
Mm-hmm.
And all of those are legitimate, and that's for each person to know what's right for them to stand on. And I'm not meaning to judge that in any way, because I think that you're right. There are times to stand back and let the fools continue. However, we are completely affected by everything. So stand close. It's hard work. It's hard work, but ultimately that is our liberation. Ultimately, that's our freedom. And our growth, our spiritual reclamation. Anybody else, anything?
So,
Yes.
so how can we do, yes, as it look close, how can we do that, those, not to make things better, not to fixing, but how can we do that to the next generation and then be the great example to our children and the new generation?
Yeah.
Yes, already it's in the past. And then I hear a lot about Japanese people slavery in Korea and China too.
Yeah.
And then we grown up like that. And
Right.
then I still do have those a little bit of a, those racist, the part of me, I grown up, those right now is the China people, of course, they don't like the Japanese or those
Right.
kind of stuff and like that. And then the color and the black people don't like the disliking, and then white people, and then they comment, I'm proud of being black.
Yeah.
Or then white people cannot say that because of those, oh, that's going to be a racist. And then it's, to me, it's a kind of silly too. But at the same time, we do the same thing, and we're Japanese too. But I understand it's already past, but it's
The kids.
kids. So how can we raise the children? That's I think that's a big question. And how can we? It's a good example to.
So, I mean, it's pretty simple. We don't allow racist language in our home. We don't allow our children to adopt racial tendencies in their friends.
Yeah.
We teach them not to carry that kind of thought or behavior.
Yeah.
That is very simple, and that is the beginning. And we invite different people into our home, and we mix with different people, and our children see us doing that, and they learn from that. And I think today's children are a little better.
Yeah,
I do think so.
I do think so.
I think there's a better acceptance of diversity with children, and certainly in schools they are working. But racism has to be fought in every single generation. It's not going to go away, even with our kids coming along. It must still be fought. Their generation, when they get older, they must fight and stand against it. All of the issues that are, around privilege have to be fought by every single generation. So, So that's the beginning, how we are in our home. I mean, children, the foundation for children is in the home. And we don't allow them to say things with their language. We immediately, if we hear them say anything, we immediately say, wait a minute, and we sit down with them and we talk about it. We say, where did you get that? What makes you think that's okay? And so we challenge them immediately if we hear anything that is not correct, that is not right around racial issues. Because they'll hear stuff on the playground. I mean, of course they will, you know, and so I mean, families can do other things too. You know, families can sit together and do check-ins and find out what's, you know, from our kids, what's going on in the playground. And what kinds of things do your friends say? And you can check in with them, ask them, and keep a running conversation going and not allow our kids to be at the table and use their smartphones. And so real conversation with parents and children is primary foundation. The best education that our children can get is with that. So, anything else, anybody? Okay. Thank you.